Welcome to Nacht Waffen Pilot with Penny Bradley. Today's guest is John W. Warner IV, my friend and returning guest. He's the son of the late senator, and he is a former race car driver, and currently he's the author of a series of books about, well, I guess it's about a lot of things. It starts off that it's historical fiction about World War II, but he throws in some occult, and he throws in some conspiracy, and he throws in what becomes the SSP. And his main character is Lady B. Sunderland, and she's a spy, and at some points she becomes a double agent, and she's interesting as hell. And I've really enjoyed reading the four that are written already. So, John, you said you've got the fifth one done.
Yeah, it's the third book. My first book was in 3 parts, so it's 3 books, but it's one story. It was really about the German Grand Prix racing, Ferdinand Porsche. But it gets into, she's kidnapped by the SS, and she's put through a female shield maiden school, you know, and so she's taught all the ancestry and the occult stuff, and then she escapes in a stolen aircraft with one of the racing drivers, her buddy, and that was Little Anton. And then Lion, Tiger, Bear, she and her Navy buddy, he's an ONI Navy captain, Bernie, and then her friend Alice, and this new character, Guafa, who's a Malian. He's a soldier she met in the desert when she was fighting, and she has a Porsche Tiger tank versus another Porsche Tiger tank battle in this town of Siwa, which was in an oasis. And the Germans did occupy that in the Desert War in '42. But this new one, they're back in the Bear airship, which is a German airship, anti-gravity, and they're up against this guy, Hans Kammler. And this is a very good book. It's called The Hidden Nazi. I recommend it to anybody who's interested in Hans Kammler. Now, Hans Kammler was an SS general. He was a contractor. And not only did he build all the underground facilities and tunnels for the SS, he was the originator of the slave labor pool. And they would actually rent out the slave labor from the death camps to companies like Mercedes and Siemens and Krupps and Messerschmitt and everybody, and then they would pay the SS. So it was an amazing racket they had going within Germany. They were, the SS, as you know, it was a state within a state. But this guy, I think I'm the first person to dramatize him in a novel. Could be wrong, but I think I'm the first. And Bea and her team, boy, they're really having some fun with him. And of course, he's involved. The Gustav railway gun, which is the biggest in the world, was in Ukraine in 1943. Some reports have it disassembled, but I have it in Ukraine firing atomic shells. And of course, even the Russians admit there was either 27 to maybe 30 million casualties of World War II.
There were way more than the German ground troops could have done.
Oh, yeah. They lost around 4.3 million. And that figure of 27 to 30 is civilian and military. But come on, how the hell do you kill that many people on the Russian front? Now, they had disease, frostbite, and starvation. You know, Stalin put people in the gulags. They had penal battalions that had to go out, and there weren't as many of those as were taught in mainstream history. I think they're trying to fool us as to, oh, that's where the high casualties came from. No, from my research, there were penal battalions where they had to have been punished, and they had to go run through minefields and do mass attacks. That's true, but it's been overblown. And so I get this story from Joseph P. Farrell, who said, well, wait a minute, what about, in The Gustav gun doesn't really make sense. It uses dual railway tracks. It's 5,100 troops to set up the thing. They've got tanks and panzers and flak battalions all around it. It takes a hell of a lot of people to set it up. The terrain is limited, and it lobbed a few shells on Sebastopol, and in 42 under General Manstein, and that's B's cousin, General Erich von Manstein.
Yeah, I remember that.
Right.
Now, was there a real Manstein,
Oh, yeah.
or is this one of your characters?
Yeah. And he oversaw the shelling by Gustav gun. And this thing is massive. You couldn't even make this up, and they blew up this ammunition bunker at Sebastopol, and it was the biggest explosion of World War II, maybe. And so,
at least Europe,
and a few other people, maybe Lavenda and others, we think that they might have been using atomic shells because that makes more sense, given the expense and the logistics of this big, monstrous gun and its battalion to do it, and that would count for some of the high casualties on the Russian front. And Stalin wouldn't tell the truth. That's an embarrassment. The Russians, they don't get enough credit. They really took the brunt in World War II. That's a lot of casualties. I mean, D-Day would not have happened had it not been for the Russians. They were harsh on the Poles when they invaded Poland in 1939. They were harsh in the Baltic states. There's no doubt. But man, they took the Nazi brunt. There's no doubt in my mind the war would not have been able to been won.
Poland had done a lot of stuff between the wars that in some ways justified the way they were treated.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of history from our Civil War until World War II that people just gloss over.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a lot of history there that when I bring it up, I get told I'm a Nazi sympathizer, but I'm not. You have to understand the history to understand how something happened. And I'm really glad you're bringing a lot of those details out in this series.
Yeah, I mean, that's my purpose. I'll quickly tell you what the rest of the book is about.
Sure.
Kammler, the Wunderwaffe weapons in Pilsen, Czechoslovakia, where the SSE-4 division was located. And that was his baby. And that's where the jets and V-2 rockets and transistors, and then there's, the IG Farben had the chemical laser. And then I write about the disc production that went on in Breslau and the Riesa complex in Silesia. And it's my thinking, and I'm not alone, the Germans had this technology programs, hundreds of them, in tunnels and underground facilities, spread out over Germany, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Poland, maybe Hungary, but those are the main places. And yeah, I'm in agreement. I think they got some basic anti-gravity disc-shaped craft going at the end of the war. And I have a giant Hanabu being built. There's this meeting I described with Vannevar Bush, John G. Trump, the president's uncle, was involved, Oppenheimer and Hubble and all those guys back then who constituted the brain trust of the American, military-industrial complex. And this is 1943, and they have this big meeting, and they're like, shit, the Germans are way ahead of us. They've been getting ET help, and we're not getting jack shit. And my God, the Gustav gun is firing atomic shells, and what do we do? We're going to lose this war. And I write it as being, I believe it was close to what probably happened, because we were way behind. But I've read stories that FDR had met with Pleiadians in 1937. There were UFO crashes all through the teens and 20s and 30s, way before that, all through history, really, but recorded.
Yeah, we have so many newspaper accounts that start in the 1880s in the United States, and there pretty much weren't Europeans in most of North America until then.
Right. And so one of the things one of my characters does is he's a mystic. Bernie Rogers, this Navy captain. and he's pretty sharp as a tack, and he said, look, we got to piece all this history together, and this is where I dip into the 19th century with Bismarck and the Prussian War, the needle guns, the Arthur Schopenhauer's philosophy of pessimism, the Weltschmerz generation, which said, fuck, we don't have anything to lose. Yeah, let's go invade France and everybody else, Denmark in 1848. And, there's no doubt that Germany advanced very quickly in the 19th century. And of course, you have the NIMSA airship programs and that kind of stuff going on elsewhere. And obviously, their mystery schools had done a pretty darn good job figuring out the ancient Vedic texts, even back then, to get any of that basic anti-gravity stuff, on the road and up and going. And so, we don't have much reports of World War One, but there was probably an anti-gravity airship floating around, somewhere, maybe several.
Well, they had an entire battalion of clones in World War II. So if they grew them in the normal traditional way, they were creating clones and raising them as infants in World War I.
Yeah,
so
upon that
technology had to come from somewhere.
They must have been experimenting with it since probably before World War I. And I have it that Mengele, was in charge of that program, and he probably was, because I talk about, there's a story about how Mengele had Aryan German, or Aryans, from the occupied territories, very high IQ mothers, and they were impregnated with this retrovirus, and they were beaten bloody during pregnancies. And lo and behold, the story goes, the babies turned out and young boys, this is in the 30s, really tough, smart, over 6 feet tall, and ready to rock and roll. And this is perhaps the progenitors of the Waffen SS units, Einsatzgruppen and the like. They were amoral and unethical and all that jazz. And so I write it that way. And the person saying the story is Ernst Schaefer. He's the Ahnenerbe SS guy. I have him and Edmund Gear again in this story, meeting with B and Bernie at this cafe in Pilsen. And he's like, shit, you don't know the half of it. The SS has gone way off the rails, not only on this and these flying disc technologies and atomic weapons, but they're doing this retrovirus genetic stuff that's beyond the pale. And Ernst Schaefer had an SS death head ring, so he was a real Nazi. But I have it that those two guys are like, look, we're loyal Germans and everything, but this shit is way beyond the pale, and they're very unhappy with it, which they might have been, because I read that some of the Ahnenerbe, they were scientists. Yeah, they believed in all this racial theory and Aryanism, lost Aryanism. And as you say, the Scythian, I have that in there from you, the Scythian bloodlines coming over and mixing with the Vikings and coming down and creating the Germanic tribes of the Roman times. Mm-hmm. And so that's all in there. It's got all the bells and whistles. But I think what's interesting is this book that I read by Len Kasten on the Dark Fleet. And I know you had some issues with that. And one of his postulations is that in the 19th century, the Draco infused some of the German people with more of their DNA. And you said you had a big issue with that.
I had a big issue with his concept that because these people had, quote unquote, Draco souls, that it was okay to genocide them. What I picked up from his book was that he wanted the Germans and the Japanese to be genocided because they had Draco souls. And that isn't, I mean, how do you decide who gets to live and die based on their...
Look, you can't kill a soul, as far as I know. And so what's
exactly. Exactly. What's the point? Plus, the whole point of what we were supposed to have learned from from that era is that genocide is wrong, no matter who's the victim and who's the doer.
Yeah, I mean, who's the Nazi? I mean, it's like
exactly.
Once
that was my issue with it, was you can't condemn the Nazis and then repeat their actions.
Which has happened time and again and throughout history.
Exactly.
Like, oh, defeat the bad guys, and then it's like, well, wait a minute, you guys are doing the same thing in Armenia or Israel or, the Gaza Strip. Yeah. I mean, come on, it's just nonsense. Yeah. And the concepts of duality and metaphysics, I've got it all in there.
Well, I'm no longer Christian, but when I was, there was a verse from the scriptures that I'm going to paraphrase because I can't remember it exactly. But Jesus is quoted as saying that when you judge someone, that you are going to be judged exactly the same way, which means you are going to repeat what you judged those people for.
Right, and that makes metaphysical, cosmic sense. We're here on Earth to incarnate and experience different lifetimes and different professions. You're an SS soldier one lifetime, and then a saint in a church in another, and then a housewife in Nebraska drinking herself to death. On the Great Plains, or in the Black Hills, it's just perspective, and it's like, someday the human race, if we survive here on Earth, we'll be very savvy with all of our experiences, very well-rounded, as my wife says, well-rounded, and that's how I feel. I mean, one of the reasons she liked me and I liked her was because we're both very well-rounded with a lot of different experiences. So that makes sense in the whole. But my question to you was his idea, Len Kasten, that the Draco put more of their DNA into some of the German population.
I've seen
warlike.
I've seen no evidence that the Draco themselves did it.
Yeah.
Okay, now I would understand if the German scientists did that. The same kind of programs that they were trying to bring back the Aryans. And the weirdest part is that the true Aryan was not the blonde, blue-eyed. No. It was the redheads with green eyes. Where
that I put in the first chapter of the book. Schaefer and Gear, they find like a 6'8" guy in the Caucasus, and they measure his skull, which the Ahnenerbe did, and they're like, holy shit, this guy's got a 1.62 times the normal average human skull. I think we found one. And they start talking about, the Bactrian Anunnaki, the Scythians, and they're like, holy shit. And I found a story about the Ahnenerbe that they found what's known as living water in the Caucasus. The story is they found near this lake, this high altitude lake, they found a karst cave, which is frozen all year round. And they found this type of spring water that supposedly the Wehrmacht or the scientists in the medical corps turned it into a super blood plasma to help their soldiers heal. That's the story of it. And I was like, shit, I'm putting that in there. And I expand on it. And they had silver coated drums, 55-gallon drums or whatever, and to preserve the water perfectly. And apparently Himmler drank it every day. I don't know. It's a story, but it sounded right up the Ahnenerbe alley.
Yeah, it does sound like them.
So they pack this guy in living water and they ship him by U-boat to Romania. There was a port at Constanza. And anyway, I ran across this obscure story and I was like, I think I can weave this in, and it worked well, I think.
Did you put the footnote for that in the book?
What?
Did you put the footnote for the source for that in the book?
No, I'm not writing history books. I'm writing novels, so I don't footnote. Okay. Everyone likes to footnote. It's just some website that somebody had an Ahnenerbe SS story. I have it in my notes, but it's like, I'm not going to footnote it because where the hell they get that from? It's
Yeah.
a story. I took a chunk of it and I made it into my own thing. But it sounds like something the Anunnaki would do. Living water.
Yeah. It sounds exactly like what they would.
Anything to further the Aryan race and the Third Reich and the Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe. It's like anything they would do. That was their job, and also to find Anunnaki technology in the deserts, which is what Lion Tiger Bear is all about. And they're out there digging stuff up and trying to get it to work. Of course they can't. It's like the U.S. Army Project Looking Glass. They were at Abydos, Egypt, and the first time they switched it on, it's over a ley line crossing. It probably blew up in fireworks. Shit. The U.S. military always throws the switch first. Well, what does this do? I don't know. Just throw the switch. And it's like
yeah.
Have to align, and the planetary alignments have to be just so, and they don't give a shit about that. They're like, throw the switch, push these guys in. Well, they're lost to history. Who cares? Send in another team. They're expendable.
Yeah. That's how a lot of us were treated in these programs, yeah.
Yeah, well, the militaries the world over have always treated, especially the enlisted personnel, not the officers as much. The enlisted personnel is like, you're expendable.
When I'm out there, I'm usually a lieutenant.
Well, you became an officer, but I'm saying just traditionally.
As a lieutenant, I was still treated pretty much like the enlisted.
Yeah, and that's someday I'd like to request that maybe Herr Major would be on a group Zoom or whatever with us. I'd just like to see if he remembers any more details, because as a hobby, I'm writing a white paper on this breakaway German civilization thing, and right now I'm destroying everything in the kitchen sink in it. And I'd like to
see if I can arrange that. But he gets mind wiped on a regular basis, and sometimes he remembers more than others.
Right.
And sometimes you can talk to him, and it's like,
no doubt. I feel like that every morning.
You catch him right after a mind wipe, and he knows nothing.
Every morning until I've had 3 cups of coffee. But
yeah, well, I'm on cup number 2, so I'm still a little.
You know what I find very interesting is Tony Rodriguez's story about, he didn't make up some glamorous thing. I mean, you didn't either for sure, but he didn't make up this glamorous thing like I was a fighter pilot. He was like, look, man, I was a cargo handler, and this is what they did to me. And oh, by the way, they had the 30 Years War on the Nacht Waffen money or military script. That's interesting because that was Lutheranism against the Vatican.
Yeah, it was.
And he said, they were very proud of that. And I was like, that's interesting. And then he says, they spoke a weird dialect. Now it's just my thinking, but in this white paper, and I do touch upon this in the book, Neuschwabenland, and Jim Marr said that also meant New Germany, but Neuschwabenland is New Swabia.
Swabia.
And I've been down there, Stuttgart. I've been down to that region. They have their own distinct. Bavaria is a section of Germany apart from the rest. They have traditions, all these Fastnacht and Oktoberfest, these solstice festivals. I've been to them in Stuttgart, doing the beer thing and everything. And men and women swap outfits. There's something going on there with that, But in Swabia, I found that interesting why they would name the Antarctic base 211 Neuschwabenland. And I think maybe because a lot of the people that were chosen might have been Bavarians. Remember, Himmler was born in Munich. He lived in Munich. And so it makes some sense. I'm trying to sort of dig this out, and I'm just throwing everything into it, but I figure future.
Well, I'm not going to be a lot of help about it because I have no memories of Camp 211. I have no memories of Antarctica. I don't even have memories of the moon. My memories start with Mars.
Yeah.
And what I know about the history was what I was taught in Shula on Mars. So it was.
Which I add into my book narrative. the Stoicism, the Pythagorean philosophy, the whole 9 yards. I put that in.
Yeah. I have a friend who's a professor of philosophy. He used to be in Australia, and now he's in Spain. But the man himself is Greek. And he's been listening in on my page for a long time. And one day he goes, "You're a self-taught Stoic." I said, "Well, actually, I'm more of a Pythagorean Descartesian."
Oh boy, that's over my head. What is that?
That's the part of philosophy that believes that the underlying reality of all we see is based on mathematics.
That gets into sacred geometry, the building blocks of the universe, and I don't know.
Yeah, it's the philosophical foundation for that scientific worldview.
Interesting.
And so that is not only what I did in Nacht Waffen, but it was what I have picked up from my schooling here as well, because I was a science geek. When I went to San Diego State, I was majoring in chemistry and microbiology. That's as much of a science geek as you're ever gonna find.
Yeah, I think so.
So this was my underlying worldview, was that everything makes sense in terms of there's a formula for this, that, and the other. Everything has a mathematical value, and ultimately it leads to the belief that we're in a simulation and everything is run in a computer and it's zeros and ones.
Well, I'm not sure if I'm on board with that. I the whole idea of the different dimensions and the infinite sublayers between dimensions all having their own sets of physics. And they're slightly different as the higher up the chain you go. That's why, I'm on a physicist's forum, and there's some spooks and other people in that mix, like
Oh yeah,
on Pandolfi and some other Hal Puthoff and everything. And I'm the wild child, of course. And these guys are all trying to figure out our UFO reality by using third dimensional 20th century linear physics. And I'm like,
well, the first thing they have to do is
the Germans were into nonlinear physics. You know that in World War II, and they're like, yeah, but we figured it out in the 70s when we were hippies, man. And I'm like, whatever.
Oh God.
It's like you're never going to figure out how a UFO flies from a different dimension with third dimensional Earth physics. They're truncated.
You have first thing you have to do is you have to toss out relativity, because Einstein was wrong on several points.
On purpose, too. I wrote that in my book. He did that on purpose.
You have to toss him out and go back to Faraday and Bohr's.
And base 10, the Germans were using base 60 mathematics instead of base 10.
You have to go back to that before you can make any kind of positive forward progress, because relativity was wrong on purpose. It was designed to keep people on Earth trapped on Earth, because you can't figure out anything right based on a lie.
Good luck telling them that. They drum me off. They already know.
The first time I told a physics group that the speed of light was not a constant, they said, "Yeah, and you believe that you were in space." And they laughed me out.
We're flying around on a big blue marble spaceship, and everyone's like, everyone thinks about the ETs out there versus us, and we're not in space. It's like, you dumbasses. We're all in space. We're flying around on a big spaceship every day. And,
exactly.
Space. You're living in space, dumbass.
Yeah, the planet is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour at the equator as it goes around the sun, and it takes us a year to do that one. And the sun is going around the center of the galaxy, and it's not going around and around on a plane, it's going around on a loop. So you've got all kinds of angular momentum going on here, and it's like, we're not doing anything, we're just sitting here being still. Right. Don't you ever just feel dizzy for no reason at all? Maybe it's because your middle ear is going, we're spinning.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I also have Ernst Schaefer. He's the, I have him saying that, oh, you don't understand. Our sun is not a fusion reactor. It's an electromagnetic sphere, and it gets its energy from sucking in from higher dimensions.
Yep.
And that's where they figured out when they lit off the hydrogen bomb in the Bikini Atoll. All the eggheads did the calculations. They're like, we're going to get this yield. We know this is it. We're going to get this yield. Well, it was almost double. And that's because they didn't realize it was drawing in energy from the higher dimensions and also killing people in higher dimensions we can't see.
Yes.
It's ripping a hole in space-time. And I talk
about that's why we ended up with a lot of ETs from that point forward. It's because
and I said,
they're coming from those higher dimensions and saying, knock this shit off, you're killing us.
Or we'll help you guys to make big new weapons,
blow yourselves up.
Yeah. And so, I talk about all that. And the funny thing is, you know what I've entitled the new book?
No.
Sanity Was a Luxury. And that's a line from Ernst Schaefer. They're having this hot debate about everything. And he says, my friends, sanity, we're in the middle of this crazy war with ETs and atomic bombs and everything. Sanity is a luxury. We can't afford
it. That makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
I do a lot of holding different realities in boxes because I have to live in this 3D reality with all these people that an amazing number of them think it's a flat earth, and at the same time have these memories of living in a spaceship that traveled to other galaxies on the regular. Right. And knowing that both are true. But
yeah,
when I talk to people, it's like sanity is a luxury. You can't
barely afford. My sanity is long gone. So, I have to do that too. And my wife and I, every time we go to a dinner party with our friends, it's like, okay, let's put our day-to-day reality in the box over here, and then we discuss, rabbits and Queen Elizabeth and Prince Charles and wine and cheese with these other people, and then it's back to the reality, and so you have to.
Speaking of Queen Elizabeth, since they announced today that she's no longer with us, I would like to tell the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, those who cared about her, that they have my sympathies because I lived through JFK and the attempted murder of Ronald Reagan. And even if you don't like the person, they're heads of state, and it's really traumatic for the people who live there.
Well, I met the Queen 3 times, and I'm not a fan of royalty. I don't give a shit if there's white hat royalty anywhere. I understand, we all have funky bloodlines. I get it. But royalty, they're part of the city.
That's one of the things you and I have argued about is.
Well, we haven't argued about it.
We all have funky bloodlines.
Yeah. But I'm not a fan of royalty. I think they're douchebags. I'm sorry. That's the only word I can think of. Technical.
Anybody who thinks they own an entire country and the people in it has issues.
The British people are waving the little flags. Oh, Queen Prince Charles and Camilla. I'm like, these people rule over you. Just like the Anunnaki claim they own us. Get on your knees. Bow down. It's like, I refuse to bow. the Queen. The first time I met her, I was 7 years old, and I asked her for another Coca-Cola. Mother, Queen Elizabeth is tapping their teacup with their fingernail, going ting, ting, ting. God damn these melons, And it's like, my whole family, except she was best friends with my grandfather. She stayed with him in Upperville, Virginia, when she would come to. There's an article I have in the 90s. Paul Mellon was the Hunt Country ambassador to the royal family, and it goes back to my great grandfather, who was ambassador to England in 1931. He was friends with the royal family. It's all very chummy, and it doesn't sit well with me. Now, no offense to the United Kingdom, but it's just like, come on, enough with royalty. And in America, enough with these Committee of 300 families too. Oh, he's a Rockefeller. Oh, he's a DuPont or a Mellon. It's like, are you kidding me? I mean, it's just this. You said it. People, by and large, most people are hardwired to, be subservient to authority.
Yeah, we're hardwired to.
Like, oh, wow.
We are hardwired to kneel before Anunnaki. We are hardwired to kneel before our quote unquote betters, who are the representatives of the Anunnaki.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And it's stupid.
You can watch it happen. It's absolutely perfect sense. And we are also hardwired for religious submission.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
and you can watch that everywhere.
Yeah, in America, there was like, oh, you're part of that family, or ooh, she's a movie star, and they give away their power. Ooh, I'm going to join Scientology with Tom Cruise. Woo! And, people just bow down and fawn over these people. I'm like, are you out of your minds? They're not better than you. They're not worse than you. Everyone's equal, but get off your freaking knees. I hate that. Obviously, it's a sore point with me. People are like, you're a melon. I'm like, so what? So what? I'm a melon.
I look at it and I'm like, so what? They put on their pants the same way you do. Either that or they wear a skirt.
Or a kilt.
Hey, men wore kilts before they wore pants.
The cult of, the superior beings on earth, whether it be the Pope or his bishops, diddling children, raping children, or, anybody in Hollywood. I don't know. Everyone says Tom Cruise and sells adrenochrome to the Scientology people. I'm like, really? You don't know what to believe, but
there's so much crap
circulates. It's like, ugh.
There's so much crap being said that I'm to the point of, if they don't have something resembling evidence, I'm considering it gossip.
Yeah, it is gossip because there's no evidence for it. But the things you and I have been discussing now, the German history, there are things you can point to, even though our history is, a lot of it is missing and Swiss cheese and a lot of it's a lie. You can actually thread these narratives together and say, well, you may not believe in this SS super soldier program, but look what happened here, and Bayer with the mustard gas, and it's like all this history of unconscionable things. I mean, every country is dirty. We all have blood on our hands.
Exactly.
Everybody does. The Germans have a knack.
Hitler talked about that he got his ideas of exterminating lesser races from
the society, the Lords of the Black Stone, the Templars.
He said that he got that from the way the Americans treated the natives.
Yeah, they did. They admired us for our genocide of the Indian tribes. That's why that guy wrote all those Western books. He's a German author. He never stepped foot in America, but he had people come to him. And all the soldiers in World War II and all the German kids and everyone were reading this guy's book. I forget his name, but in Little Anton, I describe it. It was this cult of the American West, cowboys against the Indians. And the Germans they took that to heart. They were like, holy shit. That's a great idea. Whoops.
Whoops. Yeah.
And that's why I have these Navajo Marines on board the Bear airship with Bernie and B and everybody. Bernie picks them because, the Navy is like, why are you got these Marine Corps Navajos? They got a half track with 20 millimeter cannons and everything. And he says, their legends and way of life prepare them for our kind of weird occult business with the SS. And we're going over to Germany. We're attacking the Gustav.
That makes sense.
And he brings, and of course they have this, I won't ruin the story for you, but they have this interesting moment, and it's tied in with B and her husband. And so there's a lot of metaphysical things going on.
She gets married again?
Spiritual. I don't know. You'll have to read it. So, maybe. But that kind of spiritualism and traditions of the Native American tribes of America, that's very important going forward. I stress that in a lot of my interviews. It's like,
yeah, it is.
Holy shit, I don't understand enough of it myself. I need to go to town on that. But these people have been dealing with the ant people, the snake people, all these people since the Great Flood.
Lou that I have lived with for 21 years, he's an Iroquois shaman.
Well, that's right. Namaste.
So we have been dealing with a different set of stories because he's not Navajo. And for people in the rest of the world, the Iroquois were in the area that's now Ohio and that region.
The mound builders.
The mound builders. And the Navajo are in the Southwest, and there's a good 1,500 miles between them. So this is a lot of distance, and they don't have exactly the same stories. They don't have exactly the same beliefs, but they are similar.
Yeah.
And so that Lou has been helping me with my reintegration of my altars. So we have been doing trance together with a telepathic connection, so that when I call forth my altars for reintegration, he is there to see which ones are not me and make sure they don't join the party.
Interesting.
It's an important step because I've had things that were not me try to join in.
God, if things weren't complicated enough,
Yeah.
It's incredible. That brings me to another point. As you're my therapist, so I've been having these dreams lately. Maybe you can help me analyze my dreams. I'm sitting there, on a beach with the Inuit and the whale people and the star people, and I'm building this boat with wooden pegs, and I don't have a hammer. What does that mean, Penny? What does that mean? What is the deep meaning of my
that you may have had a past life as an Inuit, or you may have had a watched a movie about them and your brain be processing that.
I'm just kidding. But I do have a lot of weird lucid dreams, but I'm not going to talk about them on video.
One of the things that I've had to deal with when I was doing counseling was that people would watch literally 5 or 6 videos over the course of a week and then dream about them and then come to me, well, I dreamed this, so I must be one of you. And I go, whose video did you watch that week?
Yeah.
Who have you been
messaging?
Your brain can't tell the difference between what you did and what you watched in a video. And most people don't understand that. And then you've got people like Shane Bales talking about that there's a program out there that they kidnap us and put us through virtual reality to confuse us. So what's real and what isn't?
You got me.
You end up in a situation where the water is so muddied that it's getting harder and harder and harder to tell who's real and who isn't. And like you said, with Tony, he came out, he said, I'm a slave, I was used by this Satanist, and then I was sent into space, and I was in charge of a cargo bin. Okay? That's a story that sounds realistic to me.
Yeah, me too, which is why I mentioned it. I like in his narrative, he says little things, like the coffee was like this, and they used Kriegsmarine ranks like, Corvette and Capitaine and Oberboatsman, and little things to details to historians like me in Germany that it's like, this is not something you just, sure, he could have made it all up, but it would have been really hard because the way he says it matter-of-factly, it's like, I don't know why, but there was this thing and it was German, and so well, I know why. Holy shit.
I saw one of the drawings he had done, and it was for an underground train station. And he had words in German drawn on the wall. And they were spelled correctly, which he doesn't speak German. Yeah. He wouldn't have known unless he actually saw them.
Yeah, his stories are compelling and they resonate with me. That's all I can say. I don't claim to know truth from fiction, but they resonate with me as being true because he's like, look, I wasn't, it was no big deal. I was just did my job, and sometimes I was rewarded, sometimes I was punished. I was like, well, that's just like the Germans. And
yeah, they're real good with the carrot stuff.
Like, well, we cooked beans that night, and I had to fix a pipe, and a lot of it's not very interesting to the average person, but to you and me and people that understand World War II and Germany and stuff, it's like, holy shit, that's a water air separation valve on a U-boat. That makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so other people, it just floats by. Oh, he was a slave. Or, it's like, no, listen to the tiny details he said. That's not easy to do. You have to look all that stuff up. Now, when he said that you said it too, that the German officers were allowed the asatru, the privilege to worship, practice asatru. Well, that's based on Himmler's new Norse pagan religion for the SS in World War II. A lot of that had to do with asatru. So these are connections that I can make as a historian, and it's like, well, that's not bullshit. That really happened, and Himmler took it seriously, and most of the SS did too, even though a lot of them smoked, drank.
The thing that I had the most problem with was that I was part of the SS in space, and it wasn't what the American authors usually describe as SS in Germany. Now, I've deliberately avoided the World War II era in my research because I know what I experienced and it wasn't how it's described. So my SS was Schwarze Sonne, which is black stone.
Sun.
I mean, black sun. But when you talked about Herrn
Castle, he had sun meanings.
When you talked about the Lords of the Black Stone, that made sense to me because I had already been contacted by a Cathar. And yes, there are still some who gave me documents in Latin that when I put them through Google Translate, I got this quote came back about that they heated a black stone and it released a black blood that makes you wise. Now, what the hell is that? That explained exactly why the Cathari Perfectus were able to do what they did in their 60s.
I'll be damned. That makes perfect sense because the Teutons and the Gnostics and the Cathars and the others, and the Templars and stuff, the Templars were this amazingly successful, mercenaries for the church, but really they were in it for themselves. One wonders about, what black they were heating up and using.
that's what I've been tracking. Why my book that wants to be written tracks that story of the use of the black stone, black goo.
Right. Because yeah, go ahead.
I have managed to track it back to Alexandria, the Alexandrian divinities.
And guess who was born in Alexandria?
Lots of folks.
Rudolf Hess.
Rudolf Hess. Okay. I was farther back in
Mystic.
time.
Boy, was he a mystic in the SS.
Do you remember in the Bible that when Herod went after the baby Jesus, they moved to Egypt?
Sort of. I've forgotten all that crap.
I was a true believer. I even went to seminary for a year. Scary thought, me in seminary.
Religious people, so I know some of this history.
So, yeah, I can't quote because I've been out for 20 years, but I can still give you the overview of what I studied. But you have these details that people miss. Jesus went to Egypt, and it was to fulfill a prophecy. But when he came back to Israel, he was performing Egyptian magic. And how was he performing it? How was he performing these miracles that were Egyptian magic? Because he knew about the black goo. In fact, the Lord's Prayer is taken almost word for word from one of the prayers of Isis.
Well, it's very interesting, and I'm not a religious person. I can't stand religion, but the legends and things are very important to study. One thing I found out was in all these medieval and Renaissance paintings, these noble people with the halos around their heads, that's a sign of higher knowledge and psionic abilities.
And because bloodline people glow.
Well, I don't glow, and I'm not psychic. I got gypped. Gypped by the gyp.
The higher purity of their blood, they glow in the dark.
Right, hence the shining ones for the Anunnaki. They were supposed to be olive-skinned and they rubbed oil, but they actually glowed. I wrote that into my last book. They're down in Nargotha and they meet this Anunnaki couple, 15 feet tall, and they actually did glow. Sort of, they were all dressed in gold. You were telling me, they were very much into physical beauty, which is where I think the human race probably gets its obsession with.
We get our obsession with gold
and movies.
We get our obsession with pretty. We get our obsession with white skin because they were the ones that I interacted with were all paper white.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's where our species gets our obsessions with a lot of things.
Oh, yeah. And I'm guilty of it too,
It's hardwired into us. How could you not?
Well, my wife and I collect old Cadillacs with tail fins, and we think they're very beautiful. But it's the same thing. It's the worship of form, and what is it? Beauty is mostly about symmetry, and all this strange, tough stuff. I got one eye that's higher and lower than the other. But they say
I do too. It shows with my glasses.
So all that stuff, we probably downloaded all that stuff from the Anunnaki. It makes sense, and I'm heavy on that in my books. It's like, the Germans knew that. Oh, hell yeah. But the Lords of the Black Stone, I'm gonna have to write that in.
I'm looking.
I mean, I call it black goo, but
I'm looking for them because they are the connector between Tula, SS, and the Teutonic Knights. They're the connection, and unless I can find more than just their name, that's why I've been talking with several Illuminati exposers. That's why I had Leo Zagami on my show.
Yeah.
He's written Confessions of an Illuminati, an entire series. So,
I read some
in
of that.
fact,
Read some of that.
yeah.
I was like, oh shit, you know. But
So,
the Teutonic Knights were interesting. In the beginning of my book, Kammler is asleep. He's having a lucid dream about being a Teutonic Knight. And he wakes up and he's like, oh shit, I've been fighting the Russians in, I don't know, 13 something, the year 1300. I forget the year, but he was this real guy. And I write it that way. And he's like, Himmler's right about reincarnation. That's why I keep having this recurring dream that I'm a Knights Templar. Because Himmler said to the SS, he says, we are a knightly order. We are Teutonic, modern day Teutonic Knights. And
that was a
Castle, Wolfsburg Castle, Himmler turned it into the SS, seat of the new era, the new Germany or whatever. And they had that famous basement room where they held rituals. One wonders if they had a black stone, maybe in the shape of a swastika or runes, the SS runes, or something that they use in these rituals. I've heard they've sacrificed young Polish women and drank their blood for obvious, satanic reasons. But I wonder if they also had a black stone in that chamber. You could still see it today. And they had all these pedestals where they had idols of pagan, Norse gods and other things, long dead SS soldiers. I wonder about that. I think Himmler would have had the Norse gods in there. And his SS hierarchy, the generals and everything, they all ate that stuff up with a spoon. And if they were exposed to the black stone and the vapors or the goo or whatever it was, that makes sense. I don't think Himmler committed suicide. I think that was a doppelganger in 1945. I think Himmler made it to Antarctica, or at least Argentina.
A lot of them went to South America. Some actually ended up in Africa, but not many. There weren't as many. There were not as many that ended up on Mars as you would think.
Probably. I understand there was something happened at the Antarctic base. I wrote it that there was a kind of a rebellion going on, and they may have said to the more people coming by U-boat or whatever, they might have said, fuck you. We've had enough of the SS. We've had enough of Himmler. Screw you. And they made their deals with whoever was down there, and they left the planet or went into inner Earth, either or, and said, bye-bye, you can't come. We're tired of Hitler. We're tired of Himmler. We're tired of the whole thing. And that's the way I kind of wrote it. And that disturbs American scientists more than ever. They're like, shit!
When I was in Shola, they didn't go into that rebellion, but they did talk about that the aristocracy who ended up running the breakaway.
Yeah, because a lot of German aristocrats were mystics.
That those folks were mortified that Hitler had replaced them in his administration with Jesuits. Jesuits were their hereditary enemy. So
since Lutheranism and all that,
it was Jesuits were created to end the Reformation. And they were not just an order, they were assassins.
Yeah.
That was their job. And as far as I know, they still are. And so Hitler slowly replaced the aristocracy in his administration with Jesuits. And that was when he started losing the war.
Yeah.
And so they blamed him personally for that.
Yeah, it makes more sense because, the Nazi rat line went through the Vatican. Now, not every bishop was on board with the Nazi. A lot of them were anti-Nazi, but most of them were. They all hated Jews. And come on, it's obvious. And so that does make some sense. You know, another thing I found out that was interesting, this is sort of on another tangent, but you know, the Ernst Schaeffer and the Anna Nerbe, they found the Kang Shur, which was a Tibetan text. And I write about it, and apparently the story is they had, depending on who you read or whatever, they had anywhere from 300 to 1,000 Tibetan Buddhist monks in Berlin translating the Kang Shur to get every bit of esoteric history and technology and war-winning weapons out of it as they could. And I wrote it. They had
That's just rational.
yeah, and I know they had the right.
If you had a document, if you had a document and you had access to people that could translate it, wouldn't you?
Oh hell yeah! I'm sure the Americans and British were doing the same thing on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and I write about a fictional text in my books that's a competitor to the Kang Shur, and the Germans are foaming in the mouth to get that. But you know, Bernie and B and everybody, they're like, fuck you. You know, it's Safeway in an Indiana Jones warehouse somewhere, and we're translating it too. But I think generally speaking, the Allies were much slower at doing these esoteric, you know, war-winning kind of things than the Germans.
I don't think so, because if you pay attention to some of the things that are coming out, Aleister Crowley was MI5, MI6, and he was cutting edge occult.
Yeah. Did you read the chapter where I have Crowley and Churchill in this underground crypt having a conversation? That's in the book Lion, Tiger, Bear.
I remember Crowley being mentioned. I remember Churchill doing lots of stuff. I don't remember that exact scene.
I have a whole chapter with just them chatting about the war, and Churchill's like, you know, what do you see in the future? And he's talking about, you know, imagery of a city being engulfed by blood and snow, and Churchill's wondering, well, I wonder if that's Moscow or Leningrad or Stalingrad. And of course, it was Stalingrad. But you know, it gets complicated. Bernie is a gay character, so in his youth, he met Crowley, and they had a little to-do love affair, you know, while climbing mountains in the 1920s.
Well, that's really consistent with Crowley.
Right, and so that's how Bernie got into the occult and everything like that. His family is Illuminati, and you know, like mine and whatever. I hate the term Illuminati, by the way. It just means illumined. And folks, these rich families, most of them are not illumined whatsoever. No offense to them, they're morons. I've spent a lot of time.
They're spending their time worrying about money.
Believe shit, and the few people that do, like Chris Mellon, maybe, you know, who knows what my cousin is up to? I don't think he understands what we're talking about, but you know, the few that do are very small in number. And it's like, oh, those Illuminati families, they're drinking the blood of children. They know all the. It's like, no, they're sitting on their yachts with their phones diddling away, going, oh, when should we go on our trip? And, you know, which private jet is better than the next? And it's like, that's what they do. They're so stupid. Trust me. I've been around them all my life. It's so boring. That's why I never joined. Well, I did join a yacht club. My ex-wife made me join. Oh, no.
I can't imagine you in a yacht club.
Trouble with the bloodlines. You know, it's nuts. They're so boring. Oh my God! For my own sanity, I had to kind of distance myself from that world. I still visit them, and they're nice people. You know, go for a sailboat ride, you know, big deal. Eat ice cream, you know, wave at the Kennedys in Cape Cod. You know, who cares? You know, they're not like my grandmother Mary Mellon, who was a full-on mystic, and so was my grandfather. I think she twisted that guy's arm, and that's why he went into the OSS. They needed mystics. Oh boy. Yeah. They both knew Carl Jung, and they probably said, hey, Carl, you got to join the OSS with Julia Child. She'll make you some souffle, and we'll all talk about Manly P. Hall and brief MJ-12 group, which he did. And Carl Jung said, listen, guys, you know, I think that ship has sailed, but, you know, someday the rudder will be removed from our grasp by these star people and their Foo Fighters. But by that time, I think the rudder had already been removed. I think it was removed after the Great Flood. maybe not 100% of the human race, but I think slowly, Sumeria, and then by the time kings and queens were all throughout Europe in the Middle Age, the Dark Ages, I think we were done. I think the rudder was removed from our
I
grasp.
think from the other side of it, the parents have been in charge for a long, long time, and they have only recently lost their grasp, like in the last 5 years.
Yeah,
so
maybe.
the rudder was in their hands, and it's now kind of in free fall. So
That's the problem. It's like, I don't want to pick it up. You? It's shit. I mean,
well, somebody that knows what they're doing should.
well, who's qualified? I could think of 24 of us in the disclosure movement who are, balls to the wall. You and Elena and James Rink and maybe a few others. That can accept the wider truth, which makes sense to me. It's like, and I would like a council of women to rule the planet, because the men have fucked it up. The divine feminine.
I don't know. I have a hard time getting along with more than 1 or 2 women at a time.
Yeah.
We tend to be territorial.
Well, what do you think men are? My God, we're swinging our dicks and competing at everything.
But you can at least
cars to do soccer.
You can at least be team. You can at least be team players.
Sometimes. I was competitive in my youth. That's why I was a racing driver. But I lost interest in that. And then when someone said, "Oh, we're all equal and competitive," that's an Anunnaki, Draco thing, and I'm like, "Oh, no wonder." And schools make a big deal. You're nothing if you're not an athlete as a man in school. You're nothing. Most high schools and things. Go down to Texas. You're not a football player. You're nothing. So, I mean, this whole thing is throughout the world. If you're not a soldier or a macho guy, I mean, I was macho to a degree and still am, but it's like obvious when you piece all the big picture dots together. And a lot of people are just focused. They're like, well, I want to discuss this UAP problem. And it's like, that's nothing. That's been going on for 80 years. I want to discuss, and you need to look at the
big picture problem is that we were bred to be soldiers in ET wars.
Yeah.
And we are still being bred to be soldiers in ET wars. It's just that we are controlling it now. And I don't know when it changed from them to us. And that's one of the things that I'm still hunting for, why my book isn't written.
I'm not sure, but I think all wars are proxy wars. I've said that in every single one of my interviews. I believe that. It makes sense. World War II certainly was. My God, there were Foo Fighters flying around. I mean, the German technology curve from the 19th century just went straight up.
Yeah, it did.
From 1800 to 1946, the end of the war, it was a vertical. And now the 20th century, with everybody in America and everything, is vertical. But the Germans did it first. And I'm like, always the Germans. They have a knack for this, a knack for that. Nonlinear physics, anti-gravity. It's like, who's helping them? And so that's what it is with my book. I have this great gift.
Genetically modified them to be good at that.
Well, they are, but other nations have good soldiers too. Germany lost both world wars, thank gosh. But we sort of in World War II. World War II just ended, sort of.
Are you sure they lost World War II?
The German Wehrmacht, Luftwaffe, and Kriegsmarine did the SS. Not really. No, they had a setback, but they came to America, the Fourth Reich, NASA Nazis, Walter Dornberger, Bell Helicopter. All right. You could look up the boards of banks, probably Mellon Bank, and there's always a Helmut Schmidt. It's like, Helmut Schmidt? And that's not his real name. It's probably, Klaus von Stauffenberg, von Ziegler. It's ridiculous. And we, Americans, come on. I've studied this all my life. I was a Nazi World War II German freak in the 7th grade because all my Jewish friends, their parents drove Mercedes S-Class sedans. I went to a fancy prep school, and it's like, and we call them the Jew canoes. I'm good friends with all my Jewish friends, but I always, how's your Jew canoe? Oh, you're a Nazi order. But it's true. We admire German technology out the yin yang. I mean, I've had German cars. I raced for Porsche. Damn thing saved my life. It's a hell of a good race car. Germans have a knack for damn near perfecting. Nothing is perfect. No machine is perfect. But man, can they make something really good. Now, that's overly technical, like the Tiger tank and the King Tiger. Too much. But quantity was better than quality, as Stalin showed us. But, it's like, man, they have a knack for shit. And boy, did we utilize a lot of Nazi scientists. I mean, Siemens, Krups, it's all, AEG, IG Farben lasted until what, 2001? Mm-hmm. A long time for a
and I'll bet you that
the death camps. I mean, Americans, I can't speak for other nations, but Americans don't give a shit. They're like, well, the Nazis, those guys are cool. I don't like the death camp thing. That sucked, but they were cool. I mean, when we were kids, all the movies and the Hogan's Heroes, and we're all being programmed. Even on Star Trek, they had Gene Roddenberry wrote a story, one of his writers did, where Kirk and Spock were Nazi SS on a planet, and they were killing the Zeons. Well, that sounds like Zion. I mean, they weren't trying to hide it. I think Gene Roddenberry in the 60s, that's a whole long story with Admiral Leslie Stevens and his son, the baby, and it's a long story. But, Star Trek was telling us the truth of the universe way back when. Racism, they touched on all these hot topics, Vietnam War, the Nazis in space. And Captain Kirk and everybody in Bones beams down. He's like, God, everyone's a Nazi. He's like, shut up, Bones. They're cool. They're cool. We got to defeat them.
But
they're cool.
If you look at the Star Trek universe.
Oh, yeah. Stuff.
The Federation is Solar Warden.
Yep.
The Vulcans are the SS because they lack emotions because they drank the black goo.
But they weren't violent.
The Romulans.
Well, they were violent.
Are the Germans, the regular enlisted.
Yeah, that does make some sense.
The Ferengi
are.
The Ferengi are what we call ICC because a certain whistleblower named them that, but they call themselves planetary corporations. And lately they've been calling themselves the Alliance, but they're still the Ferengi, or as the Germans call them, Bunker im Weltheim.
What's that?
Bankers in space.
Yeah.
Okay.
God.
The Klingons are the Draco. And yes, the Draco are more concerned with their honor than anything else.
Yes. The Bakla and all that, Lieutenant Worf. My honor is at stake. Captain Picard's like, what? My honor's at stake. I'm thinking, oh my God, the Draco.
They value honor like humans give lip service to love.
Well, I have
at the same
Draco. I don't think they're very honorable because even though they may think they're honorable, when you attack helpless women and children and eat them and mind fuck with everyone, that's not honorable. I'm going to say that to the universe right here and now. Draco might think they're honorable, but that's not honor. They're just black gooed at the yin yang, and they're a slave to their own AI shit, and so. That doesn't make sense. Simon Parks was like, oh, I was a kid and I saw the Draco march with the bell tree, there's Schellenbaum, and the banners like the Romans had and said they had teeth and dragons. And they were like so proud. And he's like, they're so honorable. I'm like, honorable my ass. It's like the Nazi SS saying, we're an honorable Teutonic society. Yeah, maybe to yourselves. but not to everyone else. Screw you. I mean, this whole thing about honor, I don't know. Someone took that and ran with it. The military's, oh, we got to, Agent Orange all of Vietnam. Well, it's the honorable thing to do. No, it's not.
No, it wasn't.
Honor at all. I'm not I've grown up around the military. I know what honor is. When I told my O&I friend some of this stuff, he's like, I can't believe anyone in uniform would go against the Constitution and do something horrible. And I said, buddy, the deep state changed uniforms 6 times a day. And I have a character like that in my new book. He's a deadly character. And
what's ONI?
A guy that changes uniforms 6 times a day. And as you know, a tuxedo is a uniform, coat and tie, a suit is a uniform, military uniform. There are all kinds of uniforms. That's why I wore camo today for you. But it's
you wore camo for me, and
because
we had a discussion about balance, and so I wore my yin yang kitties.
I grew up with cats.
Because we had a discussion about balance.
Yeah, I love cats and dogs. I miss my dogs. But I grew up with 4 cats. My dad hated cats, but I loved them. They were so much fun. I actually used to wrap them in toilet paper and draw hieroglyphics on them, on the cats. And they would go running around the house dragging toilet paper, and my mom and sisters would be like, "Oh no, Johnny's at it again!" Yeah, I'm like, I was just trying to make an Egyptian mummy, so he could, transverse to the astral world in the pyramid, with the priest caste, And
they wondered why you became mystic. Okay.
Well, if you'd asked me 30 years ago would I be a mystic, I'd be like, what? Forget it.
Yeah, well, my mom used to get worried because I was reading Bullfinch's mythology in junior high.
Okay, that does worry me as well. But that's okay. I read a lot of weird shit in high school. I mean, UFO books. I read Poe, Edgar Allan Poe, and I was like, oh, man. And then a little bit of Rudolf Steiner because he was German. And
I didn't get that far then.
I didn't understand.
Remember, my real name is Penelope. So I was looking for the source of why my father thought that was an appropriate name for his firstborn.
Yeah, interesting.
I ended up with lots and lots and lots of Greek mythology back in the day.
Oh, I hated that. But, Jason and the Argonauts, it was kind of cool. But, Warner is German. It's the Anglo-Saxon version of Werner. And I found this out when I was racing for a German team in 2001. I raced the 24 Hours of Daytona in a Porsche, and they're like, "What is your name? What is your name?" I said, "John Warner," and they're like, "You mean Johann Werner?" Werner, and they're like, "Come on, Werner, drink a beer, smoke a cigarette," And I was like, "What?" I thought it was Scottish or English. It's like, Nein, Werner, it is German. You are Saxon, just like the Union drivers under Hitler. I was like, holy shit, I didn't know. And I had about it. He's like, yeah. He's like, Granny used to say that way back we were German sometime 1,000 years ago or whatever. But Warner came from Germany. It's Saxon English.
I had a great grandmother who her last name was Gillentine. Gillentine. But going back in history, they were Saxons, and it was von Gorlington.
Ah, interesting.
So across the centuries, they ended up and are married with a lot of interesting folks like Hiltons and those guys.
Well, England and Scotland and Ireland is a melting pot of peoples, Vikings, and I've got Viking blood, obviously. Every Scottish person does, for sure. I think all Irish, English, Welsh, and they all have the Viking blood in most. And I don't know, you did that thing where, Robert the Bruce is my ancestor, and I'm like, well, that makes sense.
Yeah, I had this feeling that we were at some point connected in our ancestry. And you
no,
gave
somewhere in our.
you gave me just enough information I could start your tree, and then one thing led to another.
Well, I hope you do the melon tree because I can't get anything on that.
Okay. I had quit because I had quit because you were like,
I totally was not. I was very interested in it.
okay. Did I give you the link?
You got that impression? No. I was very, very interested in that.
Okay, then I will continue your tree.
Oh yeah, I want to see what
I do.
Some weird bloodlines. Oh,
I
never.
do.
Interesting.
I do genealogy to relax. When I'm stressed, when I'm frustrated, when I'm just. I work on the genealogy because it takes my mind completely away from the stress.
Yeah. No, you have to have a mental exercise. I do old cars. It's my hobby. And so I'm like, oh, which year did they have, 10-to-1 compression? And so
I'm at the point where I have to learn Latin because I'm reading so many source documents in Latin, and I'm starting to learn the language without studying it. So it's time to study it.
Yeah, I've picked up a lot of German words, but I'm not good with languages, and I was never good in Latin. I don't really know any Latin, but I wish I was fluent in both German and Latin. It would have helped a lot.
This cryptic tutor that I've had speaks Latin at home with his dad. That's his native language, what he grew up speaking, and he'll just start spouting off, and I'm unfortunately getting to where I understand about half of it.
Well, it's interesting, the Romans, speaking of Latin, the Romans are very interesting to study. They were a conquering empire, just like so many others, the Hittites and the Egyptians and Sumerians and everything like that.
The Americans.
It's interesting to see the human evolution of one empire to the next. And of course, now we have the American Empire, which some people call it. And in a way, it's
that's what it is.
And it's weird because we're sort of empire, but on the down low. Like we have a lot of influence in a country, but that's not widely known. It's all secret. And so I find that very interesting and disturbing at the same time.
Well, they started calling it the Pax Americana when I was in high school, but apparently they stopped using that term.
Oh, yeah.
Too many of us figured out what it meant.
Yep.
But I keep asking people, when did we become the world's policeman?
After World War II, I think. 46.
Yeah.
We were
and why did we
military power on Earth at the end of 46? We were cranking out, I think, the last days of the war, we were cranking out a B-24 bomber every hour from the Ford plant at Willow Run. And so, I mean, we were just quantity and decent quality military gear. And we had the troops and the public and everything behind us. We were on a roll. I mean, any country that reared its head, Korean War, my dad and uncle were in the Korean War. I still don't understand it fully. I understand all the politics. I know about the Russian pilots and the MiGs. I know all the interesting stuff. MacArthur wanted to use an A-bomb and everything. Truman called it a police action. He was a jerk, Truman.
Okay, I have a question.
But why we couldn't do better than just a truce at the parallel, I've never could understand.
We never lost in Vietnam, but what I don't understand is we have not declared a war since World War II, and I don't understand why we haven't. They've all been police actions. They've all been.
It's no different than a war. Well, just call it thing.
I know, but they changed from the War Department to the Defense Department, And
Semantics.
they stopped declaring war in 1947, and there has to be a reason for it, and I don't know what it is.
Well, you have to remember how pacifist and isolationist America was before World War II. World War I left a bad taste in our mouth. We didn't even lose that many men. The Allies did, the British and French and Germans did, and the Russians. But we didn't. But it was horrifying, and rightly so.
I had a great uncle who was left with damage from mustard gas.
My father's father was a doctor in World War I write about him in another character at the end of my book. But you have to remember how Puritan America was and still is. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of pacifism. And so yes, everyone generally, most people in the heartland and everything, they support the military. I support the military, not the black projects, but, but generally speaking, the good people in the military. But it's all wrapped up in religion, in God we trust. It's all over our buildings. A European once noticed our buildings, and this is 150 years ago in the 19th century, and he said, my God, I've never seen such a city, Washington, D.C., with so much religion on its official buildings. And of course, there's these giant statues of gods and goddesses, Anunnaki, that are still there. I had 2 UFO friends come into D.C. in June, and I gave them a whole Freemasonic tour, the temple and everything, and they were astounded at how many pediments and friezes had all these gods and goddesses on them. And I'm like, that's because we worship them still in so many ways.
Yeah, but we did.
My point about the United States, you have to remember that after the war, everyone wanted everything to go back to normal. And they were like, we don't want to fight any more wars. They had to package Korea as this, oh, don't worry, it's a limited police action. Okay, well, the Quakers and everybody, and everyone's sort of, and they call it the Forgotten War. And in a way, if it wasn't for some good movies, actually, that showed some of it. They didn't show the Russian pilots, but we know they did because the communications, you could hear them dogfighting. And so wars are very complex and Byzantine, and there's multiple layers, there's hundreds of millions of layers. And people just like easy black and white answers. They're like, did we win? No. Shit. It's like an armistice or, the 38th parallel, whatever it is in Korea. It's like, why? And yeah, we didn't want Russia. China came in with 1 million Chinese regulars. A million. Wave attacks, just like the Russians had done in World War II, because they had to. If you don't have equality in high-tech weapons, you send in mass attacks, which can be very effective on occasion. Pork Chop Hill and all this other stuff. It's an old Gregory Peck movie, and if anyone's interested in this, watch that because it's pretty accurate. It shows you how grim. They didn't have 100,000 Chinese. They showed a few hundred in Hollywood, but there was like 100,000 charging in this little hill, and the Marines and the Army held out. But it's like America doesn't. We're a warlike country. We prepare for war every day. The military-industrial complex is our day job. Trillions go missing. Come on. It's in every business.
The trillions that go missing are paying for the black ops.
Right. And every business is connected with the military-industrial complex. It's our day job. But we can't declare war because that's not politically correct. And so they it doesn't fool anybody anymore. It kind of fooled people in Korea, but not that many. They were like, let's just forget about it. It was a short 2-year war. But Vietnam, holy shit. And as you know, a lot of people say we almost broke free from our control system in the 60s with the hippies and the counterculture movement and the Vietnam protests and everything, civil rights. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. We made big differences, and it scared the shit out of the powers that be.
Was part of that. My mom was protesting outside the Pentagon where my dad was working in 1970. They got into the local papers. Oh, shit, Dad was pissed. And so, I grew up with that. And so I saw my mom's hippie. I was like, slowly as my teenager, I grew up, I was like, shit, the Vietnam was wrong. And my dad was wrong about it. And so I grew up with that. But the interesting thing about Vietnam was it was so long and so costly. And there were all kinds of UFOs and the MIA. And I've talked to veterans at my farm who said, I was in a Ranger battalion and we had a lot of missing. And then, oh, by the way, there were UFOs and we were told to call them enemy choppers. What happened to all of our missing in the war? They were abducted by the Greys for genetic experiments. I believe that.
They never came back. Well, they weren't all for genetic experiments if it was the Greys. There's a variety of Greys known as the long-nosed Greys who eat people.
Yeah, so do the Draco and others. Lions, tigers, and bears. I understand that. We eat animals, they eat us. That doesn't really bother me. It bothers a lot of people, and I'm like, hey man, that's business as usual. Go up to Alaska, a grizzly bear will fucking tear you apart.
Yeah.
What are you gonna kill him for that? It's his natural thing. But where, obviously the human trafficking is mostly about, trading our genetics illegally on the black market everywhere, even on Earth, because they're doing genetic experiments everywhere.
Like, from is
Maasai warrior DNA to mix in with this super soldier program.
That would make sense. I hadn't heard of it, but it would make sense.
Just giving an example.
Yeah. I know that they have tracked through and found the people today who are descended from the Spartans.
Yep, that's another interesting story. The Sacred Band of Thebes, they were all homosexual warriors that fought very, very well because they were like the Spartans, but also they fought because their loved ones and friends were all and the Nazis kind of had that with Ernst Röhm in the SA in the late 30s, and Hitler did away with them in the Night of the Long Knives.
Because he was Roman Catholic and was
probably gay himself. I don't know.
Personally offended, but I will state for the record, I have never met a homophobe that wasn't a secret homosexual.
Interesting. It may have something to do with that. There are stories of Hitler and his niece, very sordid stories, and the fact that he was very excited, folks, during his speeches and may have reached climax. That's another story. If he was a repressed homosexual, I'm trying to think of the movie about that, but there's several movies that have an evil character that is a repressed homosexual, and part of the reason he's killing people and everyone is he can't come to terms with who he is on the inside.
Yeah.
And that may apply to Hitler. We'll never probably know unless someone gives us, Nacht Waffen gives us a report or something. But, whatever.
Schola said that they left him on Earth, that they were so livid with what he had done that they left him.
I think they did the right thing. I think in Antarctica they said enough, and they closed the gates. Maybe to Himmler and some of the SS high command, they said, "Go fuck yourselves. Go to Argentina and go get a job in America at NASA or a bank or whatever you do, but you're not coming with us." And I don't blame them one bit. Antarctic settlement women were trained on the island of Ritsa in pale blue uniforms. And the story is they were to be mated with 3,500 Waffen-SS combat-hardened troops for genetics. And if I was Mengele in charge of all this and down in Antarctica, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense to me. We'll have good Aryan children with good bloodlines. And they brought in Ukrainian women. A lot of the Antarctic women, settlement women, were Ukrainian. Mm-hmm. They were Aryan, and so that's the story. And so that makes sense from a practical standpoint. Whether it's morally correct, I don't get into that, because when you study them, you got morals aside. Just think.
When you start applying morals to people that weren't moral.
Yeah, it doesn't make.
Each generation has their own ideas of what's moral and what isn't.
Yeah, it's perspective. I always tell people, they're like, "Oh, you love the Nazis." I'm like, no, I don't. But let's look at the perspective of it. If you're a poor German family in the mid-30s, or out of work because of the Great Depression, and you were basically starving almost, and the Nazis come along and hire your son and put him in the SS, and the father goes to work in an armaments factory, and you've got pork, bread, bean soup on the table, are you going to look to Jesus Christ as your savior or Adolf fucking Hitler?
Exactly.
Hitler, because he did something. And, you know, of course, there's a lot of horseshit mixed in with that. They were trying to make them all in soldiers and other things. But, you know, it's perspective. He's done something to help us. No one else has. The Jewish bankers, the American banking families, they're all in cahoots and everything. There's something to that. Prescott Bush, my grandfather, Andrew Mellon, had intimate dealings with Hjalmar Schacht, who was Hitler's private banker. I have a picture of them together. So my family's wrapped up in this whole Nazi story. You know, and so you have to understand it from a perspective point of view. I have to sometimes when I write, I bring myself to tears, but I have to be stoic myself and say, look, I've got to understand the perspective. And I have a bloodthirsty military side. I do. You should see me with an M14. I'm a pretty good shot. But, you know, it's like you have to put yourself in the position at the time, those people at that time. Most people, sadly, don't have the imagination power to do that. The right brain creates.
They're not capable of putting themselves in another person's shoes, even in today's time, much less in those other standards.
I've made that mistake all my life with my friends. I'm like, can't you understand? They're like, no.
No, they can't.
I'm like, why am I trying to? And I had to slow to realize that I was different from everyone else. I mean, I just freaking was. And, you know, a girlfriend said it to me. I had this sort of new age counterculture girlfriend 30 years ago. And she said, you know, you're really different from your friends. You hang out and you drink beer and you might watch a football game, but you're not one of them. You're a mystical, new agey kind of guy who's into World War II history and stuff. And I said, yeah, you're right. You know, my grandmother was some sort of mystic. I wasn't drilling down on her. And then I started to drill down on Mary Mellon, and
well, you know, those new agey mystics tend to have psi abilities that are not trained.
I will tell you about one thing. A week ago, I was at my farm, and my wife was away, and I was by myself. At 6 a.m, I woke up, you know, did my thing, went back to bed, and fell asleep. I had a dream. I was on a lonely road. It was the middle of the night, and I was in an old car, and my headlights went out. And I was like, oh, my God, and I barely made it to the shoulder, and I was feeling around. There was total no light, no electricity, nothing. The next dry night, I was driving my old Cadillac over the Blue Ridge Mountains, and my lights went out. Now, luckily, my low beams worked. But I pulled over, and I was just like, wow.
Yeah.
What the fuck? Because I've had, deja vu like everyone, but I've had situations where I'm at the ceremony or I'm doing something, and I'm like, oh, my gosh. I had a dream I was doing this 30 years ago.
Well, gee, this sounds like precog to me.
But this was 24 hours. And I called my wife. I was like, holy shit, that really scared the shit out of me. But, unlike my dream, I did have power in the car, and I had low beams, and I was able to make it back home. But it was pitch black in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And I was like, okay, what is my higher self trying to tell me? Slow down. I was going 20 miles an hour. I don't know what it was. And I don't know what the message is, or even if there is a message.
It may not be a message. It may have been warning you to be careful.
That's what I thought. And I'm like, well, that's not me. I'm tired of being careful in my life.
Sometimes it's good to be aware.
Aware. Hyper vigilant.
It's especially if you plan on surviving.
Hey, man.
Sweetheart, some of us
move on to the next life. I'm getting very tired of living in a world where most everyone is stupid and asleep, and there's a few of us spouting out wild stories, and nobody seems to be able to come together on anything. I'm just like, I'm as frustrated as you are. I mean, there's
Yeah, I am
what am I supposed to do?
frustrated.
What are we supposed to do?
I've been public for 6 years, and I'm still getting the same blank stare and the same beginner questions, and it's frustrating. And I'm to the point where I'm doing my show as a podcast, and the conference I'm going to in October will be the last one where I make a personal appearance. And if I attend any more, it will be as a Skype call, not as in person. They're just too expensive.
Yeah.
Those of us on limited incomes, you can't put out $2,000 to go to something where you're not making any money.
Yeah, and I've never been to a conference. It's like, why? I mean, it's just like, you can hear the lectures on YouTube and videos, and they're very interesting sometimes, but it's like everyone's talking in the disclosure movement, nobody's getting along, all these narratives are different, and nobody seems to see the big picture. I don't know why some of us can, and the others are like, well, I believe in UFOs and the Nazis and everything, but the rest of it's crap. And it's like, why? Can't you put the dots together? Don't you have an imagination? I mean, it's like everyone's, bland Richard Dolan. Richard Dolan has this huge following, and you know what his videos are about? We need UFO reporting structures. We need UFO behavior reports. We need sighting, organized, triple.
But
that's nonsense. It's not important.
But he put out a video in, what was it, 2017? I sent you a link to.
He's done some good work.
Where he said that if you don't have a DD-214 proving you were in the military and at least a sergeant rank, and you don't have a degree of at least a master's degree, that he's not going to listen to you.
Yeah.
So that automatically boots out 98% of those reports.
Right. It's like,
Talk about skewing the results.
I said, I wrote on his, one of his video comments, I said, with respect to your earlier work, which I admire, why don't you and I debate each other? But of course, he edited it up to make me look like an idiot. He's like George Knapp and others. They just want softball interviews. If any, he doesn't really do much interviews at all anymore. I mean, a lot of people only want to tackle a piece of this disclosure UFO thing and nothing else. Now, fine, that's okay, but shit, if you don't do the big picture homework, what good is it all? I mean,
well, even some of the people that have done the big picture homework, okay, you mentioned J.P. Farrell. Dr. Farrell has done,
and he sees everything through religious pink glasses.
He's done a lot of the groundwork.
Yes, for the breakaway.
He has proven there has to be a breakaway German civilization. Right. He's proven it beyond a shadow of a doubt. But if you tell him that you served in it, he will call you a liar.
Right. They think their idea is that it only went to America. And I'm like, yes, and
no.
It's come on now. I mean, there's the German Space Agency. It's just like our Space Force. I mean, it's ridiculous because, no offense to Farrell or Dolan or anyone, but it's like there seems to me a lot of these people are scared shitless. They're scared shitless that the narrative that you and I are talking about gone off the rails. And it's not fact-based, and it's not history book-based, and there's no archive footnotes, and all this shit. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. Here's a big clue. And this is what I have an interview coming up with someone else, and I'm gonna tell them. As a historian, it's easy. the big clue to all this stuff we're talking about. The big fundamentals of history, they never, ever change. And here we go. The elite few rule over the many.
Mm-hmm.
Drugs and alcohol as a salve, false friend, poison salve. My battery's dying. Let me shift. Caste systems, racism, sexism, and slavery. That's never changed since Great Flood.
True.
And this money is slavery. Religions continue to mind control everyone. Sorry, it's just a fact. It's that's the problem with Farrell and some of these other people. It's like, come on, man, religion. He knows. He's smart enough to know, but he's scared shitless because he needs God and that salve of religion. I saw his interviews they were very good with this woman who's not passed away on the Bite Show. And they're all like, oh, God bless you, Joseph. And he's like, oh, God bless you, And it's like, oh, come on. And he's talking about Nazi atrocities. Where does God fit into any of that? So you have religions. And then the last one is wars and weapon development. And for the last 12,500 years, you can prove none of that has ever changed. Civil rights, we get little changes, women's lib, progressive things, but the main nasty, big, iron hard fundamentals of history never ever changed. Who has the omnipotent power over groups of royals and roundtables and governments to keep that going? I'd like to see someone debate me on that. You can prove that from history.
No, I agree with you.
There was proof over here. I'm like, the proof is right in front of your eyes.
The Anunnaki group that call themselves Shahami have been in charge of us for our entire existence, some 200,000 years, and nothing has really changed. They have a caste system. They have royalty that runs the show. They are so sexist that their women are kept inside their homes and rarely allowed out. Inanna was a major difference to that, but her husband was killed, so she was a widow. Everything that is in our cultural standard, the things that you talked about that don't change, are all in Shahami culture.
Yeah.
And they won't change as long as the Shahami are in charge of us, because that's what they see as natural.
Right. It's like World War II. I mean, German women were put into factories eventually. But at the beginning, they were just nurses and, SS guards in the camps. They were brutal. But mostly, they wanted you to be a housefrau and let the men do the fighting. Now, when it got desperate, they implemented more women in communications and other jobs. But it's like, this whole history of this pious, religious, America was founded on religious freedom, which I believe in. I believe in religious freedom. I just don't believe in religion. I think it's bullshit. But
that makes sense to me.
People are free to do whatever they want as long as it doesn't hurt someone else. But religion hurt me. My school used it as a weapon growing up. God hates you, John Warner. You're a troublemaker. You think too much. Geez, don't even get me started. And everyone else is like,
as a too smart for my own good woman, this was how to put it. I had family that told me women don't even have souls. And this was a Christian group.
Well, I kind of believe that. Okay, I'm just kidding. But, my dad does the same thing. He's like, no cussing, goddammit. It's ridiculous. I said in the 5th grade, I said, Jesus was a used chariot salesman. And my teacher grabbed me and he's like, my God, God hates you, you sinner. It's unbelievable. I'm 11 years old and, these people are angry and and my favorite is this. I mean, no offense to Christianity, all religions are fucked up. But you've got as a corporate logo for Christianity, a guy being tortured to death, bleeding on a cross. And the cross, the Christian cross, is a pre-Diluvian symbol for reincarnation. Who thought that one up? Vatican.
You know the symbol for
Constantine and
the symbol for the Templar, not the Templar housemaster. That cross that turns into a circle. That goes back to the line of Cain.
Yeah.
I think I have sent you the bas relief of Cain where he's wearing that as his symbol.
Yeah, I believe it. It's a funny story. I don't think I've ever told this, but I have a good memory. I remember when I was 2. I remember my mother teaching me to read and write it too. Barely, but I remember it. When I was 3, I went to St. Patrick's Day School over here in Georgetown. And it was an Episcopalian school. And, all we did was play in sandboxes and get along with the other kids. But they had a chapel. And I remember the chapel. And, of course, I was kind of, even at 3, I was kind of bored with it. But I remember the stained glass window. I remember it like it's yesterday. And it was a Knights Templar, the Red Cross, the Templar Cross. And I didn't like chapel. I was bored and I fell asleep or playing with my toys or something out of my pocket. But when they played Onward Christian Soldiers, my spine went erect. That's the only hymn out of all of them, only hymn I love. I hate them all. They're all boring. Not that one. And I wrote it into Little Anton at the end. B is, she's hearing the Wycombe Abbey school choir sing Onward Christian Soldiers. That's based on my life. And I went back, and I think the chapel's still there, but they got rid of all the stained windows, and I couldn't find it. I had tons of Templar soldiers and everything, so, I don't know. But at 3 years old, for me to look at this guy, and stare at it, because I remember I had a very nice teacher, and she's like, "You really love that window?" And I said, "Yeah, what is that?" And she says, "That's a Knight Templar. That's a Crusader. A soldier for God, and he went to the Holy Land and whooped those Mohammedans." And I was like, "Ooh, that's where I want to be." And she's like, "No, that was 1,000 years ago." And so I find that very odd. People have clues as to their past lives, and I think you and I were Gnostic people, Cathars, Templars, whatever it was. You and I and a lot of other people have gone through these lifetimes where it's like, yeah, that Christian religious thing, yeah, you should look over here. The Gnostics, they're drinking beer and having a good old time with the Cathars. Go check out what they're learning, the Holy Grail cup of knowledge stuff. I could see, you and me, and then we'd be like, yeah, that's great. It's boring. I'm not going to go back. The Vatican's to bankers.
What do I remember? I remember the life before this one, I was a Jewish mathematician. The life before that one, I was named Molly, and I was married to a man named Mike, and we were grifters on the American railways, and we lived like millionaires until one of our marks caught us and beat us to death with a billy club.
Yikes.
The lifetime before that, I was a girl named Sarah, and I was a slave in Carolina, so it was before the split of the states. And I was a slave, and I ran away, and my owner caught me and beat me to death.
Yeah, I remember you saying that one. That's very interesting. I'm sure I had vague childhood memories of what it was like to be in prison in a gray form, and like I was arrested at one time for speeding, and I spent 3 days in jail. And I remember the smell of the steel bars and all that, everyone's singing, songs or whatever. I really got chills down my spine. And luckily my sister came and bailed me out. That's a long story, but it's like certain things just trigger these weird childhood things. Like my dad could not figure out I know I was a soldier. I write about it. And I'm good with guns, and I'm a good shot. My dad and I would watch war movies when I was a little kid. And he said at 7 years old, I'd be like, ooh, a Messerschmitt Bf 109 with 20 millimeter cannons. And ooh, that's an MP44 Sturmgewehr rifle. You know? And he's like, how the hell did you know that? And he said that I said, I don't know. I must have read it in a book. And my dad's like, what book? You know, so we used to watch our great British program called The World at War. It's still good.
I remember that one, yeah.
Yeah, with Laurence Olivier.
Yeah.
And I swear to God, watching that, I was like 12 or 13. I was like, Dad, I just know I was a soldier. I don't know where. I don't know for who. I just know I was a soldier. You know, and he's like, well, I don't understand reincarnation or anything, but you know, knowing you, maybe. And so it's a very interesting phenomenon. I think eventually we'll all have total recall of our past lives. My higher self is being very stingy with mine. I don't have any clear recollections of a former past life.
One of the times that Lou and I went into trance together, I found what I call my incarnation tunnel. And it was just this dark tunnel, and there were like rows of seats like in a church, except they went back as far as the eye could see. And these were who I was. And they weren't all human. There were an amazing number of women who had been slaves, who had died in childbirth, or children who had died from cuts, diseases, whatever. And I go back about 600 years, 700 years, and then they stop, except there's one that is like 3,000 years ago, and then all of them before that, I'm an ET.
Yeah, I think a lot of us mystics and disclosure, folks, we've definitely been ETs in our former lives. For all I know, all the human race probably has.
I figure most
fragments going back to
I
ET.
think a lot of the people, human race, are baby souls, that they've never been anywhere else, and they haven't got that many lives under their belts. That's why
some people just aren't as quick on the draw as.
Yeah.
I don't say that to be arrogant. It's just, my God, everyone out there listening to this, you know what we're talking about. I mean, I love a lot of my friends, but my God, they're dumb as mud fences on certain things. And they might be put at a bit.
They may be very intelligent, but they don't understand a lot.
No.
And they're not interested in it. It's like they're holding on for dear life to the illusion that everything's okay.
Yeah, and I sort of understand that, but not.
It's okay to be a 2-year-old if you're a 2-year-old.
Yeah. I once wanted to date this girl, and I'd known her for years. We were good friends, and I said, you and I should date. And she's like, she just laughed, and she said, I'd love to, but I got to tell you, I'm as deep as a puddle. And she's like, and you're not. Well, we won't last a month. And she was probably right. And I was really shocked because I thought, who cares who one person is like this another. But that's why I attract people deep. It's just the way it is. I'm not, everyone is equal in the cosmos. I don't think anyone's better. We're all just different. I have to reiterate because he's an Illuminati son of a bitch. And I'm like, okay, whatever. But
I think I look at it as it's okay to be a 2-year-old if that's what you are.
Yeah. Well,
being a 2-year-old is not any better or any worse than being a 15-year-old or being a 40-year-old. You know, it's just a continuum. We've either all been there or we all will be.
Yeah, I mean, that explains why at age 2, I asked my mother, I said, why did you teach me to read and write at age 2? That's so young. She goes, you asked me to. And I was just like, what? Are you kidding? And she's like, remember the fire engine book? And I was like, yeah, I was in a crib. I remember that. And she's like, you could read and write, because I taught you. And that explains, you know, that's a small story, but look at Mozart. Come on, folks. He wrote a concerto at 5. He must have had a billion lifetimes as a musician. General Patton said it. You know, I was Hannibal, and I was all these soldiers. I was a foot soldier for Roman, and I was, you know, all this stuff. A marshal for Napoleon. That's why I'm a good general. Same thing with Henry Ford. And I think Ferdinand Porsche, I don't know if he believed in that, but I wrote it that Henry Ford told him that because Henry Ford was vocal about his reincarnation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you people are idiots. Of course, that's where my genius comes from. He and Patton weren't shy about it, and neither was Napoleon. That's why Napoleon, I think...
Christianity is the only religion that doesn't teach reincarnation.
I know.
And it may have in its original form.
What do you think resurrection is?
Exactly.
It's reincarnation. I mean, it's just... I tell my religious folks that. I said, what's the big deal? Jesus reincarnated. Why can't we? Oh, he's the son of God. I'm like, what? Son of King Anu of the Anunnaki? Come on. You know, that's God. Probably some Emperor Anu or, you know, pick a god or goddess. Come on. Odin. Oh, you know, everyone takes the high road and says, you know, Odin's going to punish you. And it's like, really? You have a conduit to Odin? And they say, I am crazy. You know, I mean, it's just... No, I believe in religious freedom. I would fight for the right of people to worship in whatever church they want, but don't proselytize to everybody with your bullshit. I mean, come on. And everyone's scared to talk about ET. It's always the Nazis did it, or no, we don't know. It's a mystery. And it's like, it's not a mystery. Stop being a coward. You know, people have channels and they're like, well, sure, ETs, they exist. But let's talk about this. And they always try to look for human explanations for everything. And it's like, look, we're very creative, we're good engineers and everything, but you can't explain away all of history by saying, oh, we did it ourselves. Yeah, we built the pyramids with some fancy technology from the priest class. Were the priests hybrids? Yeah. Were the workers, they weren't slaves. They were workers hybrids? Yeah. Were they paid in bread and beer? Sure. Sounds good to me. I mean, it's not that human beings aren't responsible for a lot of our modern world, so to speak, or ancient world, which was even more modern, pre-Diluvian. And it's like, but come on, Earth is Grand Central Station. It's like, I was at London Heathrow in August with my wife. I was like, this is like a microcosm for planet Earth. It's just a mass shit show, stuff coming and going all the time. Militaries chasing their own tails, and UAP task force is on the job. By golly, it's like, it's all madness. I mean, if it wasn't so funny, sometimes I really would go crazy.
Sanity is a luxury.
Sanity is a luxury. Sanity was a luxury. Yeah.
Okay, we have gone over 2 hours. I know your back is probably killing you.
My back is killing me.
So, my next question, before we finish off entirely, where can people get your book?
Amazon. My new book isn't published yet. It's going to be a couple months. I haven't even got a cover for it. But Lion, Tiger, Bear, and Little Anton are on Amazon. I don't take any money. I give it all away to wounded veteran charities. I don't need. Amazon has not sent me one dime. I've sold 1,700 books. Not one dime have I gotten from Amazon. So, even for charity, but they're corrupt. But if you have books, it's the only way to distribute them efficiently is by one of those book websites or really Amazon, because everyone's lazy as hell. They're like, "Is your book on Amazon?" I'm like, "Yeah, I can't find it." Type in Little Anton. Oh, okay. read it. It's too long. What's those big words? I'm like, did you go to college or didn't you go to Harvard? Yeah, so I mean, it's just forget it.
I'm writing my book for what I know my audience is, which is mostly Trump followers. And since Trump speaks at fourth grade level, I'm actually aiming for between sixth and eighth, and I can't seem to drop it any lower than that. I'm not able to. So
Yeah, I can't.
I'm
Can't do it.
I'm aiming for that range, and I'm writing the text simple, low vocabulary, and I'm putting those footnotes you talked about for the people that want to find where I got the information. I'm writing 2 books. One of them is why did the Germans go into space? Where did they get the technology to do it? And where did they get the occult information for the SS?
Can I answer some of that?
I'm perfectly willing to discuss this with you.
But if you need any forward or anything from me, just let me know. I'd be glad to write something.
I'd be most honored. Thank you.
But I don't want to trounce upon your, opus magnus.
Well, that's the book that wants to be written. I'm also writing the book that is the story of my main space altar, and I'm writing that as I experienced it, except I'm writing it from her point of view and trying to write it linear.
Yeah.
And my memory isn't linear, it's more spiral.
Well, do the best you can, but I think that's an important book for you to write because, everything that we do, I hope, is for future generations. I mean, my grandkids, I have step grandkids. What I do and say and write is for them, really. I mean,
I'm to the point. YouTube has deleted so many of my associates' work that I can't count on the video record. So I know I have to write something that will be in print somewhere. So.
Oh, one of my interviews was deleted.
Ooh.
Yep. The guy who did it interviewed me. This is a year and a half, 2 years ago. But he interviewed me, and then he interviewed Lou Elizondo, and Chris Mellon defriended this guy on Twitter, like a Japanese schoolgirl, the Hello Kitty backpack, and he deleted my video because Lou and Chris were more important to him. And I'm fine with that, but I just thought that was funny.
Well, you know where that his heart is, and
yeah, I mean, a lot of people cannot handle the harder stuff. I didn't even talk about that so much of the hard stuff in that interview, but it was enough to piss off. Thank gosh, enough to piss off Chris Mellon and Lou Elizondo that they probably emailed and said, "We're gonna pull our stuff. Drop John Warner." Women. Candy asses. What the hell's wrong with those people? But that's, it wasn't that good of an interview, and actually I do better stuff with you or I did a really funny one with Stephen Cambion, and I like him because he just trashes everyone and he's fearless, and I respect that. I don't agree with everything he says, but that's okay. I mean, it's the fact that he's not afraid to go up against all the stars of the UFO disclosure movement and trash them. And a lot of times he digs up very good stuff. Now,
there's good
helpful
stuff.
Long run, trash everyone. We all do it to a degree. Probably not helpful, but man, it's funny as hell. And his sense of humor is hilarious.
I try not to trash people, but if they're doing something that doesn't make sense to me,
yeah,
I will bring it up. But I did do
Sure.
a naming names video, but that was because crimes were being committed. And if I'm exposing crimes of the Black Ops and ignoring crimes in the community, then I've become a hypocrite.
Yeah, and it's I look out for things like that too. I don't want to be labeled. I mean, I'm a very flawed person, but I don't want to be labeled a hypocrite. And so, you know, I walk the talk. I really try to help out. That's why I do the veteran stuff, to give back. It's like, you know, I have a lot of harsh things to say about Black Ops and some of the military stuff, but it's like, you know, at the end of the day, you know, when a wounded person is a wounded person. And
Yeah.
hell, even the Germans took care of our troops. You know, they don't make war on the wounded. Not so much the Russians, you know, sadly, but the other Allied troops, they did, and because we knew we treat their prisoners good. But anyway, yada yada, yakety yak yak.
Yakety yak. Thank you for being here.
Ja, ja, ist alles gut.
Danke sehr viele.
Yeah.
So.
All right.